Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Harry Sherrard, and on behalf of the Talks team, a particularly warm welcome to our talk this evening. It's not quite as hot as we thought it was going to be. We put a few fans out there to cool you down. There is some water at the back there, still unsparkling, so do feel free to partake of some water if the heat is getting to you later on. If anybody's got a mobile phone, appreciate if you put that on silent or switch it off. That would be much appreciated. I first met John at the RAC Motoring Book of the Year Awards, and his book on Goldie Gardner was a very deserved winner. And after chatting with John there, I thought this would be an excellent talk for Brooklands, and I was very pleased that John agreed to come along and speak. I read the book, it's absolutely excellent. I think I'm going to read it again actually quite soon. So without further ado, a big hand please for John Mayhead.
Thank you. So, before I talk about this extraordinary man, Goldie Gardner, I just want to explain a bit about who I am. My day job is writing about classic cars for a living, and I'm very fortunate to do that. I write for Haggerty, the Haggerty Drivers Club, and if you read Magneto or Octane, you may have read my market reports. So I do a bit of concourse judging, but I'm generally just a petrol head, and where I get really interested in writing is writing stories and stories about people, and our hobby, our enthusiasm for cars has these extraordinary stories, and I found this one completely by accident and wrote my book, which, as Harry said, was fortunate enough to win both at the RAC Motoring Book of the Year, Motorsport Book of the Year, and also Guild of Motoring Writers, winner of the Bewley Trophy, the Suzuki Trophy, which is down there. So this is where it started. This is a very nondescript bit of tarmac just outside Ostend. And in 2018, I was freelance writer, and I needed an excuse to go across the channel. And if the HMRC is listening, please ignore this bit. But I thought I've never been to where the Biographical speed trials were held. And this was this strip, this bit on the left-hand side, which isn't used anymore, but it's some of the original strip of tarmac that was used just after the Second World War. And there were some extraordinary drivers there. Sterling Moss drove there with Sheila Van Dam, so the XK120 was tested there. The Healy 100 was tested there. All sorts of different cars. And then this chap stuck out to me, almost literally, and he would have stuck out. So he was 6'2". He was disabled. In 1946, when they started using Biographical, he was 56 years old, and he drove in a pre-war MG. And I thought, God, he's really interesting. He has a military cross from the First World War, so he had a very interesting backstory, which I was interested in because I used to be in the army. A couple of my colleagues are here tonight from the Coldstream Guards waving at me. Don't barrack me, please. So I thought, oh, he's really interesting, I'm going to write some more about him. But I couldn't really find anything. Pretty much everything online at the time was rubbish, I found out subsequently. But I did find out that the National Motor Museum had 35 boxes of his stuff, his records. And so I got onto them, and then COVID happened. So just as I started researching, I had a few photographs of pieces of paper that I'd taken from him. And then good old Alan Wynne here, who's my old friend from Brooklands, got in touch with him, and he said, well, there's Beatrice, who I think used to work there, doesn't work here anymore, still works here, brilliant. She was absolutely fantastic. I would fire off emails into the ether, never met her. It's like, can you help me? So I got all the research back from there, and then I went down rabbit holes to the army museums and all sorts of different things. But there were a few things that made him an absolutely brilliant biographical subject. Firstly, nobody had written about him. His book, Magic MPH, which I think there's one copy left at the back. I brought a few because I seemed to buy all of them while I was researching it because I wanted a really nice dust cover. And in fact, I've got one right here, actually. This is his book. And I know it's his book because his daughter gave it to me. And it's got his handwritten corrections in it, because anybody who's ever written a book realizes that the publication bit is the point at which you realize, oh, I've made a mistake there. And then you go and correct it. And then the second edition is where you get it a bit more accurate. So he wrote about himself in 1951. After that, nothing really. There were a few newspaper articles, as I say, a few things online which weren't correct. And then it all kind of disappeared. But the other reasons he was a brilliant biographical subject was, firstly, he was a really, really avid and keen and good photographer. So this is early 1920s in France when he went out there to see the Strasbourg Grand Prix, one of the first races post-war, post-First World War races. He took all of these. There were thousands of photographs in the collection at the archive in the National Motor Museum. And he had this sort of spidery handwriting that once you worked out what it meant, he told you who was in it and what was going on. And it was great, really good for a biographer. The second thing was he was an almost obsessive collector of clippings. So from after the Second World War, he paid for clipping services like this, and they went all around the world, anything to do with Goldie Gardner, any of his record attempts, and they took a clipping and they sent it to him. And there are ones from all over the place. So you can see the kind of global reach of what he was doing. Rhodesian Times today and something from Singapore tomorrow. And then thirdly, his letter writing was extraordinary. These are two examples from 1949 I put up there. The one on the left is to Reg Jackson, not Robin Jackson of Brooklands fame, but Reg, who was in charge of the competitions department at MG for a long, long time, and one of two of his key mechanics. And then the one on the right, which was John Thornley, who was at that time sales and competition manager at MG, and then became general manager shortly after this. And I was really lucky. I was given access to various different MG collectors' private collections, and there were moments when I found one letter that he'd sent to John Thornley, and then in another collection I found the answer. And sometimes there were like 3 or 4 letters a day, and John Thornley was trying to run MG, and he was trying to also at the time deal with Goldie Gardner, but for a biographer, absolutely brilliant. So who was he? He was born in 1890, 31st of May, 1890. He was the eldest son of Alfred Gardner. His name was also Alfred, but he was given the second name of Goldie, which was his mother was from Scottish stock from Airdrie, and her Scottish family name was Goldie, and so he was given that. So Goldie is sometimes put in inverted commas as a nickname. It wasn't. It was a middle name. But he was known, especially here at Brooklands, he was known as Goldie. He went to Uppingham School, and these are photographs from there. He was extremely fit. This is him looking quite surly. In fact, I have a pointer. That's him there. And over this side, that's him. He was tall. He was physically fit. He ran. He played rugby. He was a very good rugby player. And the other thing he did when he got there was he discovered motorcycles. Now, this was slightly frowned upon at home. He managed to persuade his father to help him buy a motorcycle, and he ended up with a 5-horsepower Rex, which was not only one of the most powerful machines out there at the time, but also, really interestingly, I found this while I was researching it, it was one of the first bikes that Malcolm Campbell had, that W. Bentley had, and that Cecil Kimber had. So it was kind of this formative years, and he thought he was going to race motorcycles. When he left school, he then, after a very brief stint in London, which he got very bored very quickly, he then went out to what was then Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, as a tea trader. And again, this kind of, this was an extraordinary time for him. There were groups of young men like him, all traders, these fantastic roads that are being built through the jungle to bring logs and rubber and tea back to the ports, and almost no traffic. So they all imported motorcycles, and there are some brilliant reports from the local papers of them terrorizing the local ladies by bombing around on these motorcycles. And he played rugby again, and he seemingly had an absolutely fabulous time. His contract came to an end in 1913. He went over to I've lost my train of thought. Hang on. Burma. Where it was a very different kettle of fish, no metalled roads. And he, in his book, he said, fortunately picked up a nasty bout of typhoid and malaria, and was brought back to the UK, or to Great Britain. Just in time, in 1914, for war to break out. And he found a doctor who didn't know him, and signed up. And he signed up in the was then the Royal Field Artillery. They trained down in Hampshire, and then they moved up to Salisbury Plain, and then by 1915 they were out on the Western Front fighting. And he straight away made an impact. This was his mentioned in dispatches given to him by Field Marshal Sir John French himself in November 1915. So straight away made a really big impact. And it's interesting, and I know my colleagues and anybody else who served here, was when you look back at somebody's service, especially in a war, it's very interesting to see how they were judged by their contemporaries. His commanding officer wrote basically a book, although I think there's only one in existence, which is in the Imperial War Museum. And it detailed everybody in his regiment and what they did and what the whole sort of process of the war. And so he was the only non-regular officer that was given command of a battery, which is a company we call in the infantry of about 150 men. And that was a real sort of mark of how they judged him. By early 1917, and you can tell that this is 1917 because you can see he's got a Military Cross medal ribbon on. He'd won the Military Cross for gallantry. And also, when his commanding officer had gone away on a course, he was actually put in charge of the whole brigade. So again, that sort of shows how well he was considered. And then in August 1917, he was very, very seriously injured in an air crash. He wasn't, as some people have written, a pilot. The story that was told, including by his wife many, many years later, was that he crashed behind enemy lines and dragged himself many, many miles back. I don't think that happened. I won't go into details because it's the kind of, you need to buy the book. Yeah, there's the twist at the end. But it's a really interesting story. But it wasn't the way he wanted his wartime service to end. So he came back. He took quite a long time. It took years to be invalided out. And by 1921, he was kind of at a loose end. And he lived in Reigate. So Brooklands was very close. And so he naturally gravitated here. Now, interestingly, I mentioned before about the motorcycles. And he actually had almost done a complete outer lap of Brooklands. Frank Appleby, so some of you may know as the senior TT winner, had another 5 horsepower Rex. And before he went to the First World War, before he joined up, he managed to persuade Frank Appleby to lend him his bike. And he said, I almost got the whole way round before somebody flagged me in and told me off. So he'd almost done a lap of Brooklands before. But by 1924, walking with the stick, so he was not completely invalided, but he could walk. But he decided that actually he wanted to race, and cars were really the only option for him. So this car, top left, was his first purchase. That was 1924, and that was a Gordon England Austin 7. Gordon England had raced very successfully here, as many of you will know, in Austin 7s the previous year, and then he decided he was going to make the most of that by selling these. And each one of those was sold with a certificate saying that it had been tested up to 75 miles an hour at Brooklands. And he bought one. And it went. He, I think, didn't quite do as well as he thought he would. And at the end of the first season, he put a conrod through the side of his block, which was quite painful, as a lot of his contemporaries at the time were extraordinarily rich. People like Campbell and Count Zworyski and people like that, extraordinary wealth. He came from a well-off background. His father was also a tea trader, but he wasn't rich. And so actually to have a car that lost its engine, it was quite a lot of money, to put that right. And he actually took it to a place called Milne and Russell in Reigate, which was a dealership. And they said, well, we're looking for a general manager. And he kind of went, I'm your man. So in 1926, he got a job, which he stayed all the way through the rest of his working life there. And that meant he could buy another racing car. And he went through a succession. So as the Samson up the top, which he raced, and then an Amilcar there, which he, but that's at the Dublin Grand Prix, which he raced. So he raced quite a lot at Brooklands, by quite a lot, 90 races between 1924 and 1938. That includes time trials, small circuits. So for example, things like the Campbell circuit. He also did time trials, hill climbs. Shelsley Walsh, he was quite a regular at, and also Test Hill. So these are some of his bigger cars. That's a Rover Speed 20 at the top of Test Hill, one of the very first. He had some fantastic cars. I mean, as a bit of a petrol head, you look at his car history and it's absolutely amazing. And even though he wasn't rich, he went from one to the other. That's a supercharged Mercedes-Benz. You've got a Talbot Largo that he had put in this one-off body. That's these two Alfa Romeo 8Cs. Both still exist. And that WA, it's an MGWA, that still exists. This one is a superb Talbot 7590, which I drove last year. It's at the Classic Motor Hub in the Cotswolds. And that was prepared for him by Fox and Nichols. It's got these beautiful sort of aerodynamic running boards on it, and it just goes like a bomb. And there's pictures of that doing various trials here. So he loved it, but then he started to branch out a bit. And that was after the war, actually. That's 1930s in his first K3. So his branching out took him outside of Great Britain. This is the Samson Grand Sport at the Boulogne Speed Trials. As I say, he raced twice at the Dublin Grand Prix, but then the kind of big move for him was the race of the year, really, for a lot of people, or the road race of the year, which was the RAC Tourist Trophy at the Ards circuit in Ireland, in Northern Ireland. And in 1931, he first became linked. This is him number 32 here. With MG for the first time, and this was the brand that really he was going to become very associated with. So this is a C-type Montlhéry midget named after the bank track where George Easton had set so many records, and developed by MG to get sales on the back of that. And Goldie was one of the first 14 buyers of those when they were rolled out here, and they all had different colours, and so that year 1931 he took it to the Ards circuit, was run off the road by a Mercedes, and then the following year went back, and this is the following year, so this is 1932, and you've seen this just now. It didn't end well again. This was on coming up an area called Bradshaw's Brae, and it's very, very similar today. It's a very winding road. You're going uphill. It's very close. And he came round the corner. There was been a crash in front of him. He went onto the curb and went in a hole, and it just flipped. His life was saved by, he was wearing a helmet, one of the few times he was wearing a helmet, but he took most of the weight on the same leg that he'd had very badly damaged in the First World War. His driving mechanic, Owen Patterson, was okay. But he was in Newton Ards Hospital for quite a long time. In fact, longer than the car. It took longer for him to fix than it did for the car, because the current owner of this, who still races this, has the letter from MG sent to Newton Ards Hospital saying, your car's fixed and here's the bill. Which is quite a nice thing. It kind of put him off a bit, off the racing side of things. His brother, whose son is still alive, and who helped quite a lot with me on collecting information for the book. So his brother tried to race this. He'd already got an entry in a race in the Isle of Man and came dead last. So it wasn't for him. And even his son says, yeah, it was like, my uncle was a racing driver, my dad definitely wasn't. But
Daytona it had to be.
Well,
so in 1931,
his friend,
the Bluebird, remodeled with a 1400 horsepower Napier engine,
to go
is back in front.
In 1935 out to Daytona.
I don't know what speed we can lock up, but we can't go very fast.
In fact, Bluebird dawdles along the beach, but only preparatory to her actual run. And here she comes in all earnest. Then back on the return mile. That, in case you couldn't quite time it, was 246.8 miles an hour, average of the two runs, Campbell's fifth land speed record. Your heart was set on that 250 mark, which had just eluded you. So in early 1932, here you are back again at Daytona, zooming along the beach at a speed which even the lay eye must recognize as...
Okay, so that was the earlier record attempt. So he went in 1935, Campbell got up to 276.8 miles an hour, but didn't quite make the 300 he was aiming for. What it did, though, was it gave Goldie a real sense of how record breaking could be the way ahead for him. He saw the adulation that Campbell got, both in the press and also back in Great Britain, and it was this sort of sense of national pride. It was very interesting. I was talking early about how Brooklands had been really important for people after the First World War, and how one of the senses of when they were racing or when they were record breaking that really kind of drove them, I think, was this sense of national pride. And there was a real sense, we're doing this for our country. And so he went home from there and he thought, yeah, I'm going to do something about this. He didn't have the money to have a land speed record attempt, which, as today, it's extraordinarily expensive. So he went for the smaller vehicles. The other thing that America gave him was he met his first wife there, Mariel. Now, she was an extremely wealthy American, and she introduced him to various different movie stars and all sorts of different people, including members of the AAA. And this is the first ever stock car race run in America. This is on Daytona Beach in 1936, and he was the only non-American to take part. And he turned up and they said, "Where's your helmet?" And he said, "I haven't got a helmet." So they had to give him an American football helmet, and he drove it. And this is him here lining up for the overtake in a Lincoln Zephyr. There were basically the road where he came down the beach, around this northern approach, back up the road and back like that. It got so bad they had to basically cut it short because everything was getting stuck in the sand. But it was his first kind of, he got a feel for, right, I can do something here for my country. And so when he got back, he was friends with everybody here at Brooklands. And Ronnie Horton, who a lot of you will know, had already broken some records in this thing. Now, this was an MGK3, so 1087cc. This is obviously, it's been rebodied. So it's an offset single-seater. So the diff was put to one side so you could narrow it, sit the driver down, and this is the same car that I sat in at the MG100 at Silverstone about 18 months ago. No, last year, 2 years ago now. And it's extraordinary. You know, he was 6'2", he was disabled, couldn't walk without a stick, and this was almost impossible for me to get in and out of. And if anything had gone wrong, then you're pretty stuck. Now, in his C-type Model Area Midget, Goldie had already achieved the 750cc record, outer circuit record here, and he broke the 100-mile-an-hour barrier for the first time, which really annoyed Austin, that was aiming for it. But in this, he managed to get the 1100cc record and was given a very special Brooklands badge of 124.4 miles an hour. And that record stood until the end of until the circuit stopped operation. So he's still held that. Now, I didn't manage to buy that one, unfortunately. That went for auction a few years ago, and it went for a very large amount of money. But yeah, as I say, I've sat in his car. And what he decided to do with this was to try and break longer and faster records. And the place that where it was all happening at that time was Germany. The Nazi regime saw motorsport as being this really strong factor of dominance, and that they set up a thing called Rekordwoche just outside of Frankfurt, and they invited this slightly probably odd Brit in a funny helmet with a reused Brooklands racer to come along, and you kind of think, did they kind of do it to prove that they were better and that their modern technology was superior? I mean, you can see, look, that's him on the left-hand side. That is Robin Jackson, actually, there. That's Reg Jackson, no relation. So he did get Robin Jackson to come over and help him set it up. And he did extraordinarily well. On his birthday, oh, sorry, no, we're getting ahead of ourselves. So, so he started breaking records there, and then at Montlhéry in France, and then Eberron van Eberhorst, the head of the Silver Arrow, said to him, looked at it, and he said, "You need to streamline that car. You won't get any faster." And the streamlining he was talking about was this. This is an Auto Union Type C. That's Bernd Rosenmeyer with Goldie there. And so they went back, and back here. And there was a brilliant letter I've got from the National Motor Museum in December 1937, which was from Lord Nuffield saying to him, "Yes, you can go ahead." And he wrote, "I got the go-ahead to go along with the streamline job," in his words, and he was given £1,000, which then was quite a lot of money. So they got Reed Railton to design the body. Now, this isn't the same MG K3. It's still a K3 underneath. This was actually the record car, the EX135 that George Easton had used, but they completely rebodied it. Now, Reed Railton's first design was this one on the right. It was very, very similar, as you can see, to that Auto Union. So similar, in fact, that that he had to pay Keller, which is a German company, for the design. Now, interestingly, what the Nazis didn't say at the time was a Paul Jarre design, and Paul Jarre was Jewish. But you can see that was a much slipperier car in terms of aerodynamics. So that's Reed Railton there. You've got Sid Enever there, one of his MG technicians, and then you've got Reg Jackson there on the right-hand side. That's it without its clothes on. You can see offset still. This is where he sat. No seatbelt, no fire extinguishers, fuel tanks right next to him. They took two of the drum brakes off later on to lighten it. And that's the car that he went 207 miles an hour in. He didn't wear a helmet either because there was the Perspex cover that they made. He was too tall, so his head knocked against it. So he used to wear either a linen or a leather wind cap. Quite extraordinary. If anybody wants to know what 207 miles an hour even slightly feels like, there is a video on YouTube of somebody going in a BMW M4, brand, modern car, going 207 miles an hour down the Autobahn, and it's terrifying. And that car has ABS and traction control, and they know the tyres aren't going to explode. There were instances, there was one brilliant thing that he talks about in his book here, coming off the members' banking, and he was slapped on the shoulder. And it was only when he stopped he realised there was a huge piece of tread from one of the tyres that came off. Now, interestingly, when you look at the pictures of all the people, especially post-war, the guy from Dunlop Mac is always there. Tyres were so important, but they had no idea how fast these would go before they would delaminate. It was quite extraordinary. The other thing that was quite extraordinary were the speeds he got up to. So what I'm not going to do tonight, because I haven't got time, is to go through all his records. They were extraordinary, and I've got annexes in the back of the book. But this just shows, this is a great example. So on the left-hand side is Sir Henry Seagrave's Sunbeam, the 1,000 horsepower. That's 45 litres, two Sunbeam Aero engines, and that got up to 203.79 miles per hour, new land speed record at Daytona in 1927. 12 years later, in EX135 with a 1,087cc engine, he went exactly the same speed, and actually in one direction he went 207. And that is not just a judge of the man, it's it's more a judge of the mechanics and the engineering and the design of this thing. Absolutely transformed in 12 years. And what a time that was, in the 1930s, when so much development was taking place. And so much of that came back to these two people, and I've talked about them already. So that's Reg Jackson there, and that's Sid Enever. So anybody who knows old, especially pre- and post-war MGs, will probably recognise their names. What they're doing on the left-hand side is that this is the engine. That is a boring machine. So what he did was he went out on one day at Dessau, which is of one of these record Vockers, and he did it with his 1187cc engine. And then that night, they took the head off and they bored it out in situ. And then he went out the next day and it was just over 1100cc. So he got another record. And that's the way he did it. He would pick off these records, got bigger and smaller engines. And they were there, they were there all the way along. They were thick as thieves. I got to know Reg's granddaughter very well. I met her once at her house and she said, yeah, okay, you've kind of, I trust you now. You better see Granddad's stuff. And so she brought down suitcases like this one down here and opened them up. And it was letters and photographs nobody had ever seen before. Cigarette cases, from George Easton, thank you for helping me in 1931, things like that. But the interesting thing was the sort of social history. She said they had the whale of a time. Everything that they'd heard of was these two, thick as thieves, wherever they went, absolutely loved it. And when they were working, it was in places like this. This is in Italy in 1946, by the side of the road. They were all, they did all of this with toolboxes they took with jacks by the side of the road. It was extraordinary. So I've mentioned Dessau once. This is the Dessau Road. This is where he got his fastest records just prior to the Second World War. This was an autobahn. It's still there. It's just outside of Frankfurt. As you can see, this is where the central reservation would be. It was intentionally made by the Germans that you could remove that, ostensibly for speed records, but actually more likely because it was an emergency airfield, and the single-span bridges as well, so you could go through them. But the records he got, and he started to get real national recognition in Great Britain, and even prior to the Second World War, was awarded the Seagrave Prize. A couple of months ago, for those of you who get the Brooklands Bulletin, I think it was January-February edition, on the front cover was this photograph. And I was like, wow, that's brilliant. That's Campbell, that's Goldie Gardner, I think that's AFP Fane. And this was the launch of the flying squad in 1936, and they were all involved in this. Now this, for the Coldstream Guards element, is really interesting because this was a territorial group of the Corps of Military Police that had been set up by Campbell. And just before the breakout of the Second World War, there was a Coldstream Guards officer, major, called Coates, James Coates, and they set up what was called the Coates Mission. Now, the Coates Mission was a secret mission to evacuate the royal family should the Germans invade. And so you've got, he hired all the TT and professional motorcyclists he could find, gave them all uprated bikes, and interestingly, the flying squad also included a load of racing drivers. And I speculated in the book, and we don't know this because there have been books written about the Coates mission, but at this stage there was nothing. It was all very vague and very top secret, so nobody really talks about it. But there were 4 stately homes up in the north of England, and there were, we think, 4 racing drivers. So kind of thinking maybe one to each. There were stories of later on of the House of Cavalry having armoured cars and things, but not as much fun. I'm sure if you were the king, you'd much rather have a racing driver racing you up to your place of safety. So World War II happened, and of course, Goldie being Goldie, he signed up straight away again. He was posted to Scarborough, met his second wife there. He got divorced. I won't go into that from his first wife, but I go into it in the book. And this is his wife Una, and then got very bored of training people how to drive, which is what his job was. So joined 21 Army Group in Montgomery's headquarters, crossed the beaches at D-Day, and then followed this quite extraordinary road through northern Europe up to the end of the war. And he was in charge of groups of French lorry drivers, getting them together, getting them lorries and moving stuff around. So really interesting. And then at the end of it, he was, in his words, given a bowler hat and bar. And then he went straight back out there again. So the instant the war ended, straight away he was on to all his friends saying, right, we need a long straight road that hasn't been bombed. And there weren't very many out there. Now, Johnny Lurani, who was one of his friends from Brooklands days, was in Italy and said, it's a brilliant, brilliant road just outside of Brescia Bergamo, absolutely fabulous. So he went out there. He was given a brand new, then, MGTC, this one, in March 1946, one of the very modern, very new, not modern because it was very much similar to the ones pre-war, but it was the great new thing that MG was trying to sell around the world. So he was given that as a promo. He drove it out there. He lent his old WA, which you saw before, to one of his friends, and then this was brought on a truck, EX135, his racing car. And now this is a bridge, and this is where they're starting. Now you can see the flaw in the plan. Firstly, there's a bridge, it's a humpback bridge. Secondly, you can see the road surface is not very good, and half of it's paved, like cobblestones. It didn't go well. When there were other photographs of this really, really narrow, big bend in the middle, and they didn't get anywhere near it. But it was the first post-war, post-World War II record attempt. So they got back, and apparently one of his mechanics was talking to his wife, who'd served in the ATS in the Second World War, and she said, why did you go all the way to Italy when there's that beautiful road in Ostend? And he said, what are you talking about? And so this time he went out there with Reg Jackson to have a look. And it was 20 kilometres, dead straight, ended in a field of sheep. And it was the Germans had planned to have a motorway between Ostend and Istanbul and made 20 kilometres before we made a dent in their plans. That's the three cars actually in Monte Carlo on the way back. So there you go. That's the Yarbecca Road. So two straights, absolutely nothing on it. Although the first time he did a test drive, somebody with a donkey cart walked straight out, and they missed it, luckily. But he didn't know anything about it. But also, it was a bit Heath Robinson. You can see the wooden trestles bringing the car out there. But he gave it a go, and he did extraordinarily well. Another little video.
On the outer Strad track near Ostend, the one-legged racing driver, Colonel Goldie Gardner, has been record-smashing in his special streamlined 750cc racing midget. The record in this class was held by a German at a speed of 140.7 miles an hour. Gardner races the mark to 159.15 for the flying mile and breaks other records as well.
Right, I don't know if you noticed the two obvious errors there. They called him Goldie Gardner, and he said he had one leg. He got really, really annoyed about that sort of thing, and people quite often said he had one leg, and he would write a letter saying, I haven't got one leg, I've got two, thank you very much. In that era of post-war austerity, to have somebody British who was making an impact on the world stage, doing something positive, was really, really big and really important, and not just in Britain. So he started getting lots of adverts. So there were a few here which were there were things for Duckham's and all sorts of different brands were using his example. MG loved it, so they commissioned things like these little articles and things like that. But also, equally, they loved it in Belgium. You know, they'd just been through the war. They were looking for something which was positive. He loved Belgium. He lived there for a while. And they gave him this, which was his daughter actually gave me. That was given to him, and there's a picture of him being presented with it by the local car club there. This was their local sort of glassware. And he really started to sort of pick up a following. Now, the only trouble about post-war austerity was that in the word austerity, and MG, even though they were starting to sell quite a lot of cars, especially in America, were not very well off. And his next move, he wanted to go to Bonneville in America because he knew that he couldn't do any more than he had done already on the roads. So slightly naughtily, he thought, well, if MG aren't going to pay, I'm going to go somewhere else. Now, he bought this car. It never was owned by MG. And so he went up the road to Coventry and spoke to this new outfit called Jaguar, who were testing a new engine called the XK. Now, this is a 4-cylinder, 2-litre XK engine. That's Wally Hassan. That's Lofty England. And they are testing it. And it went out. And when you look at the records, it stopped being EX135 and it started being the Gardner Jaguar Special. And it did the trick, because the following year, the other thing he did was, there we go. He also went to Austin, which again was a little bit of a dig, and went to America and did some A40. That's an A40 Devon, and he did some record breaking in that. And those two things really prompted MG. And then they came back and said, yes, we'll pay for you to go to Bonneville. So in 1951, off he went with the complete support of the crew to Bonneville. Now, as part of the story, really, the Bonneville salt flats, as most of you will know, are renowned now for record breaking. It was all quite, again, ad hoc in those days. He was having to get lines painted. There were boards and things. And as you can see, they stayed in a motel, and that's the base of that, without the cover on, being towed out, and then it was towed off onto the sand and raced. And again, he got his much longer records there, so 200 miles, 200 kilometers, 75 miles, and that sort of thing. And that's when it's when his book came out, there, Magic MPH. But also, he was really pushed as an international celebrity. This is Jinx Falkenberg. She was the early 1950s American version of Holly Willoughby, really. So she was an anchor, and he was interviewed by all sorts of CBS and ABC and all sorts of different people. And the trouble is he wasn't very good at it. When you see him on video, he was very, what we probably these days we would say is probably on the spectrum somewhere. He was very focused on what he's doing, didn't really like to make eye contact. And although Kel Cavalli, who was the big importer of MGs, was pushing him, getting him all the foot in the door, it didn't quite do what he wanted it to. It's just so he was still getting there, and he was still getting the attention, but it wasn't great. So the following year he went back, 1952, and this happened. So it had been raining, the salt got very sticky, got stuck in the treads, and he skidded, and he hit. You can see all the salt there it's sort of impacted, and you can see the dents there. They're swapping over the canopy because he hit one of these wooden marker posts, and it was like the chances of it happening are very, very, very slim. So hit it sideways, it cracked through the perspex, hit him on the head. He thought he was fine, they patched him up. The next day he went out and broke more records, as you do. But it wasn't fine. When he got back, his daughter, so this was 52, his daughter was 5 years old at this point. And she said after about a year, he would get worse and worse. And eventually she found him and he collapsed at home. And a doctor was called, and she said she can remember the real stress at home of her mother having to rent out the top bedroom to a family to make money to pay for the nursing. And eventually, in the summer of 1958, she said she came home one day from school, the front door was open, ambulance was outside, and they brought her father down on a stretcher. She said they put him down in front of me on the tiles, and then they took him away, and she never saw him again. And he died that evening. She wasn't allowed to visit him in hospital, and she wasn't able to visit him or to go to either the memorial service or to go to his funeral. I feel very extraordinarily privileged to have been trusted by her, by Rosalind Gardner. She told me that she'd never really talked about that before. And then I said, do you mind, because I'm going to put it in a book? And she said, no, his story needs to be told. So why is he not remembered more? I think there's a number of reasons. I think that the way of his death is one of them. He didn't go out in a massive ball of flame. He didn't survive. He started to go, he was a judge when his friend, the Duke of Richmond, had just started Goodwood. But at Goodwood, there were all those new generation of drivers. There were the Hawthorns and the Peter Collins and Sterling Moss. They were young. They had these amazing cars and they were glamorous. And he was old then. This is 1952. I know it's 1952 because that's his suitcase there, and that label, which is from August 1952, was still on it when I got it. It's not there at the moment. But he's 62 years old there, and he was still trying to break records. The other thing is he didn't survive, so he didn't go on. And so his story got lost for a long, long time. And also, I think because he wasn't a showman, when you look at people like Sir Malcolm Campbell on screen, they're fantastic and they tell the story. And he just wasn't like that. So what he left behind was not quite as rich. But what he actually did was quite extraordinary. It's BRDC Gold Star medal winner. Anybody who's served will know that is a proper chest full of medals. That is very impressive, including an OBE. And then the Seagrave Trophy at the Royal Automobile Club is a proper honour. And please look at the list of people that have been given that. In terms of the records, this is in 1950, October 1950. This is his hand-typed with his spidery writing. He reckoned at that point he'd broken 77 records. He hadn't. It was more than that. He didn't realise how many. It was actually, by the end of 1952, he'd broken 148 local, national and international records. And absolutely extraordinary. When I first wrote my book, I sent it to a few people to proofread, and one of them was Richard Noble. And Richard Noble said, in his words, he said, some of his records are still extraordinary even at today's rates. And 3 of them, if you go on the FIA website today, 3 still stand. I mean, it's quite extraordinary what he did with a pre-war car. And that is a few of them. There you go, many of his records. I think that one bottom left is one of the most extraordinary things, which is of the 10 outright categories, and they were different sizes. At one point, he held 6 of the 10. And yeah, Piero Taruffi was his big rival, and every time he broke it, Goldie would go out there and knock them down. And those are the classes there. Right. I will leave it there. I'm very happy to take questions. Harry, if you, yeah.
Big hand for John and his excellent talk. Thank you. So Chris, I'll go down this side. Chris, have you got any questions for John? I've got one myself actually, because I read in the book when he did Le Mans as well, and back in those days there was what was known as the traditional Le Mans start, where the drivers would run across and jump into the car. But I think because of his disability, the Le Mans organisers gave him a dispensation. He didn't have to. He could stand beside his car. Is that correct?
It was here actually. It was
right.
So it was a Le Mans style start here.
Right.
But he was
Got
given
it. Okay.
dispensation. Interestingly, one of the things online that has been repeated a number of times was that he raced at Le Mans twice. He didn't. It was a different Gardner. He also didn't do the London to Land's End trial. Various different Gardners. But no, he did. You're absolutely right. He was given a dispensation to start in his car.
But that was here at Brooklands. Okay, so
yes.
as you say, there's a bit of misinformation out there as well.
Yeah.
So any other questions then for John about Goldie Gardner? No, got one here.
Thanks for an interesting talk. My question follows on a little bit. The damage to his leg, did it mean they had to adapt the cars in any way?
Interesting. So the Austin 7 had hand controls, but everything else was driven like a normal car. So generally, no. His modifications tended to be either performance related or, for example, the Talbot 7590 had a special little panel made here, which still is with the car, with all his light switches on. So he wanted everything just right. The TC that you saw there had twin extra horns on the front. The WA, which was ordered just before the Second World War, he could sort of see that there was going to be, like war was brewing, there was probably going to be a blackout. So he had it painted really light blue so that it would stand out on a dark night. And little things like that. So he did adapt his cars, but not really for his leg.
The Jaguar engine, I do have one of those engines in I've got a small museum for Hawthorne, and I understand from Jaguar that they never made more than about 10 of them, which of course you probably know as well as I were going to be for the 120, weren't they?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
But obviously my one doesn't run, and I've never known, the factory do own 2, I think, actually.
Yes.
But they've never run them either. You know.
No, it was a fascinating story. Apparently, so the superchargers were provided for EX135 by Chris Shorrock, and he went along to see his superchargers or to talk to Chris Shorrock, and he said that he saw this thing under a tarpaulin and said, "What's that?" and it was the XK engine, and it was really interesting how they wanted to test their engine at speed. He wanted a 2-litre engine, and it just came together just at the right time. And there was, although it was never said that it was a bit of a dig to get MG to put their hand in their pocket again, it kind of, it did work, whether it was meant or not.
Jaguar never pressed it very well at all. I've never seen an advert in the Jaguar, and I've got a lot of Jaguar literature and so on. It's strange. I suppose they didn't want the MG emblem sort of to...
Yeah, he actually did take the MG emblem off the front of the car. There was a crossed flags of a Union Jack and a Belgian flag, and it did run without the MG emblem on it. But I think people probably still knew that it was at heart an MG.
Anyway, thank you. It was
thank you.
Good.
John, thank you. I hope not an unfair question, but you mentioned that 3 of his records still stand. Now, I assume at least one of them is a sort of Brooklands record, but are there any records still extant that people might go for?
Are there any extant that we could still go for, did you say? This is my friend. So the Brooklands records obviously stand, but these are FIA records. So these are over a period of time with the set size of engine. And yes, they can, they can be attempted. I mean, they're really interestingly was the, and I'm veering into territory, which is my brain and my memory here, but you saw the Silver Arrows and and what they were doing, and one of their records that they set as a road speed record in that same period, so just pre-Second World War, was only beaten by a Koenigsegg R about 6 years ago. So some of the, the bar is really high for some of these records still, and but yes, they could. If you're suggesting, we need a driver, so yeah.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? No. Okay. Well, in that case, then we'll wind it up. Another big hand, please, for John Mayhead. Thank you.